Exploring abandoned places, whether it be for fun or in the hopes of finding something, you need to remember you may find more than you originally anticipated. Please join me in welcoming Skinned Locust on the hunt. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. A couple of years ago, I met this guy at a party who told my friend and I about an abandoned house that he used to explore a lot and take pictures in. We asked him to take us there one night so that we could explore, and although he seemed a bit hesitant, he agreed and we made plans. A couple of nights later, they picked me up and this guy directs us to the house. Turns out, it's behind a field on a street that I've lived about 10 minutes from my whole life. On our way there, he tells us a quick backstory behind the house. Decades ago, probably in the early 1900s, the house was an orphanage run by a priest. The priest started acting strangely, and someone decided to send an exorcist to check the place out. The exorcist sensed that the evil spirits were coming out of the well, so they closed it up and built a new one. Not too long after, the priest killed the children and then himself in the house, and it has been abandoned ever since. While this story definitely creeped me out a little, I was skeptical. I wasn't too sure that I believed in evil spirits or possessions or anything of the sort. We finally get there, after having a lot of trouble trying to find the mostly hidden gravel road, because the field was pretty overgrown. We drive down between the road, and I'm feeling a little creeped out. Especially once we get to the clearing and the house becomes visible. The property consisted of a house with a small shed on one side and a decent barn on the other. The guy tells us that the shed and barn are pretty run down inside, so it wouldn't be safe to explore much, so we decided to just stick to the house. As we walk into the woods and closer to the house, he gets visibly anxious and quieter. We make our way inside, and we get to the front room, when he tells us his story. He and his friends had gone in there for the last time a couple of months ago, and were smoking in the exact spot that we were, when they saw what he described as a shadow figure come out of the room to our right, that was full of black mold. He claims the figure chased him and his friend out of the house and down the road until they had safely driven away. He tells us that's why he's so anxious, and understandably so. We still decide to explore further, and we make our way upstairs. I stop feeling so uneasy, and I start to have fun exploring. It's definitely still creepy, but I haven't had any bad feelings or seen or heard anything strange so far. We get down to the basement, and the kid tells us that that's where he had always felt the most uneasy. As soon as we entered one of the rooms, the darkest one, he suggests that we turn off our flashlights and sit there to see if we sense anything. I go over and sit under the stairs, and as soon as we turn off our lights, I feel the strongest sense of dread I've ever felt, and suddenly my shoulders feel heavy. It feels as if something or someone is sitting on them. I freeze for a second, and then turn on my flashlight and demand that everyone does the same. I tell them what I felt, and feel pretty silent. My friend chimes in, and says that he's not feeling too great either, so we decide to leave. We get in the car, and the guy and I stand outside to smoke a cigarette, whilst the rest of the group waits in the car. We smoke in silence, and as I'm looking back at the abandoned buildings, I notice a light coming from what looks like the second floor window of the barn. Without noticing, I start walking towards it. It felt as if something was pulling me there. The guy sees me doing that and grabs me and pulls me back. He tells me that he knows what I'm feeling and that he had felt the same thing the first time he'd came here. He told me he felt the strongest urge to go back there for days afterwards, and he did. He went back as often as he could, until the incident with the shadow figure. After we finished our cigarettes, we get in the car and we drive all the way back down to my house in silence. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, and for days after that, I hardly slept and had troubled dreams. I felt the same way the guy told me that he felt. I had the strongest urge to go back, but I didn't. Every night for at least a week afterwards, I felt like I wasn't alone. Then I got sick, sore throat and a bad cold, a really bad cold. I even lost my voice for a few days. My mental health began to decline. I was always angry, and I was becoming quite depressed. I had a history of mental health issues and hospitalization, but I had been doing really well for the past year or so. No more than 2 weeks after my trip to the house, things got really bad, and I checked myself into the hospital and stayed there for 2 weeks. Ever since then, whenever I pass the spot where I know the house is, I feel the slightest urge to just turn into the gravel road and go back into the house. Of course, I never do, and I know I will never, ever go back there.
It was kind of a rainy, drizzly day on a Sunday in April. Me and my guy friend had planned to hang out the day before. We're both the same age, 14. I left my house around 10 in the morning because we had planned to get breakfast also. We met up on our bikes at the corner of a random street near my house, and he suggested that we leave the neighborhood and go to a different town. I knew my mom probably wouldn't have wanted me to go to a different town on our own, but I wanted to, so I didn't tell her. We headed off on our bikes. It took us about an hour and a half to fully get 3 towns over. We got food at some cafe on the way, but we ended up in a sketchy neighborhood. We rode our bikes around looking for something to do, until we stumbled upon an abandoned house. We parked our bikes on the side of a house behind a large bush, so no one would see them, and we looked around. It looked pretty broken down, and had a very creepy look to it. The house had a fair amount of caution and do not enter signs on it, which was enough of a warning to us, but we didn't listen. We ended up trespassing and breaking into the house through the back door that was open. I didn't want to because I was a bit of a scaredy cat and wasn't really the taking risks kind of type. I believe we would have gotten into trouble, but we never did, so he forced me into going in. There was a small broken wooden fence that you had to climb over before you were standing on the actual porch, where the back door of the house was. The fence was broken with pieces of wood and glass sticking out, so you had to be careful climbing over it. The house smelled of rotten eggs and mold. I had a pit of guilt and fear in my stomach. I was scared out of my mind, and jumped at every little creak and noise that came from inside the broken down old house. We looked for anything valuable on the first floor of the house, but there wasn't much. We stumbled upon a creaky old staircase that was leading up to the second floor. I had no intention of following my friend up there. He went up himself, and I waited at the bottom. He finally convinced me to come up with him, so I did. Again, we didn't really find anything that valuable, except for some fake jewelry and old pictures of the previous family members who once occupied the house. After raiding everything we could, we went back downstairs. Okay, here's where the scary part comes into play. We again found ourselves searching the bottom half of the house, finding a couple of secret rooms we hadn't seen before. I suggested countless times that we should leave before someone finds us, or we get hurt, but my friend replied with, 1 minute and we will leave. But we never did. We stopped dead in our tracks when we heard some faint footsteps coming from the upstairs area, right above where we were standing. We made eye contact with each other, both terrified. I mouthed, "You hear that too?" And he replied back with, "Yeah." After a couple of seconds, we heard a door slam from upstairs. We bolted for the back door as fast as we could and slammed it shut behind us. My friend had quickly hopped over the broken fence on the back porch. He was taller than me, so it was easier for him. But for me being quite a short girl, it was not that easy. I ended up hopping over as fast as I could before my other leg was over the fence. I felt something freezing cold brush past my ankle. I didn't look behind me. I just threw myself over the fence. I twisted my ankle and got a small cut on my leg, and it was bleeding a lot. I limped to our bikes that were behind the bush where we had left them, and we were off. We both headed straight home after that, and decided not to talk about what we saw ever again. When I got home, I noticed where I had felt a cold breeze on my ankle, and there was a large bruise. I will never sneak into anywhere abandoned ever again.
This happened in England in 2001. I was 19 at the time and living in London, and headed north for the weekend to visit my friend from Melbourne, who was just living outside of Leeds at the time, in a town called Harrogate. Not far from where he lived was Harewood Castle, an abandoned 14th century castle and fortress with an interesting past. After arriving and enjoying a pleasant dinner with his host family, he and I decide to make the short walk to explore the ruins, despite the stern and frankly excessive warnings from his host family to under no circumstances go to the ruins at night. It's 11:30 p.m, so away we go. The castle had recently been commissioned for a £1 million restoration, which was yet to get underway. As such, the decaying castle was only reachable by crossing an ancient moat, still full of liquid sludge, and fairly significant steel fencing, which was set up to keep exuberant young folks like ourselves at bay. We managed both relatively easily. It's a windy, cloudless evening with a fair chunk of moon out, giving us a reasonably decent light to explore the ruins. My friend suggests that we climb the spiral staircase connecting the courtyard to the top of the castle, which had great views for miles. After we climb up the pitch black staircase using our hands to guide us, we sit on the parapet, talking about life. After about an hour or so, we decide to head back down to the host's house. I enter the spiral first, and about halfway down the spiral staircase, my friend, chatting incessantly, stops talking completely. Without being able to see him, I sensed that he'd stopped moving altogether. I ask him if he's okay, and get no response. I ask again, no response. I move back up the staircase and grab his arm. No response. My heart rate is going through the roof, but I manage after some time to get him moving. He still hasn't spoken. I reach the bottom of the staircase first, and jump down into the courtyard. The distance in height between the bottom of the existing courtyard and where the wooden floor was centuries ago is about 5 or 6 feet, and after landing safely, I turn and look towards my friend, who has just entered the moonlight from the shadow of the castle. His face has a calm, almost trance-like expression on it, and he is looking over the top of me still mute. After a truly strange few seconds that feel like an eternity, my friend's right shoulder jerks forward violently, as if he were pushed extremely hard by a strong adult. The force of the push causes him to lurch forward, spin, and land flat on his back, legs and feet in the air, 6 feet down on the courtyard floor. Suddenly he snaps out of it, and begins screaming at the top of his lungs, a strange sound given he's badly winded. He then gets up, and proceeds to do 5 laps of the courtyard at Usain Bolt's speed, searching for the exit while still screaming. I catch him and steer him out of the exit. We careen down the castle hill towards the steel fencing, the moat, and hopefully the track back to Harrogate. My friend nearly hurdles the 10-foot steel fence before sliding further down the hill and falling straight into the sludge moat, completely submerging himself, and with superhuman strength, the swamp monster manages to scramble out of the moat, which thankfully is relatively shallow, and tears off up the track. I climb the fence, transverse the moat, and chase him back to the host's house. When I arrive, my friend is inside. The commotion has awoken the family, who stands in the kitchen gawking warily at the swamp monster. With nothing else said, the father stares at my friend, then at me, then back at my friend before saying in his thick and wonderful West Yorkshire accent, "What did I tell you?" before proceeding to tie up his dressing gown and go back to bed.
This takes place a little over a year ago, some weekday around midnight in central Ohio. I want to preface this by saying I'm not particularly religious, nor do I necessarily believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but something weird happened that night that I can't explain. This story is 100% true, except for some certain details that have been changed to remain anonymous. So let's call it a Wednesday, as I don't quite remember what day it was, but it was around 5 p.m. A friend tells me about an abandoned building her friend showed her the day before, and asked if I wanted to check it out sometime. Of course I do, but being the curious soul that I am, I wanted to go that night, whereas she could not. I ask a few other friends to make the journey with me, and they all decline either because they aren't into the whole B&B trespassing thing, or they're otherwise just busy. I decide to go alone. This isn't something I usually do, as I have a few close friends who are just as experienced as I am in the urbex, and the 3 of us are an excellent team when it comes to stuff like this. I've gone to places alone before, but never with this little research done on the area. I couldn't find anything on the internet about this place. I decided to say fuck it and go, as I'm not one to back down from an opportunity like this. So I grabbed my bag, flashlight, camera, and I'm on my way. I tell someone exactly where I'll be in case something happens, and to call the police if I stop responding for a few hours. I arrive about a mile from the location, and start my journey. Most of it is just woods and creeks, but the last bit is a parking lot. I get to the lot, and see not one but 2 buildings to explore. This is turning out better than I expected. I chose to go in the building on the left, as it looks more easily accessible, and start looking for a way in. Around the back, I find some metal stairs that have been overgrown and look like they're close to collapsing. I decide to take my chances and slowly climb them, keeping my eyes on each step to make sure I'm not going to fall through or anything. I climb the stairs just fine and get to the 2nd floor. The door is closed, but opens just fine, no padlock or anything, and I'm in. Looking around with my flashlight, this place is in better shape than a lot of abandoned buildings around my location. Part of the roof has been caved in from a tree falling, but everything else looks pretty good. I walk around the entrance room a bit more, and realize where I am. There are note cards all over the floor with basic information on people. First and last names, address, date of birth, diagnosis code, and inpatient or outpatient with a check next to one. I'm in a psychiatrist's office. Nice. I love these kinds of places, and insane asylums are my favorite places to explore. I have a seat and look through some of the patient cards. I look up diagnosis codes and try to profile who the person was. No particular reason, just interesting stuff. After a bit of this, I stand up and continue my journey. Now, the way this building is set up is there's basically a giant letter I, with the entrance stairs I used at the bottom, and boarded up the main entrance in the center. The only set of stairs to the first floor are at the top of the eye. I look around some of the second floor room and don't really see much, mostly empty offices with a chair or lamp in the room. I do, however, find a room that I assume was for children to play in while their parents were seeing a psychiatrist. It had a sandbox and some toys laying around, but I noticed someone took some of the sand and drew a pentagram on the floor with it. I chuckled at this. After seeing everything I needed to see on the second floor, I go down to the first floor. The stairs are steep and winding, but very sturdy. I check the door to make sure it won't lock behind me and make my way down. The first floor is basically just a long hallway with rooms along one side and a reception area on the other. I start checking out the rooms on the right side. After a few interesting rooms, break room, kitchen, storage closet with Christmas stuff inside, I come across this office with something interesting on the desk. Before getting to that, I want to pose a question. Why does every abandoned building have Christmas stuff in it? Like seriously, 90% of the buildings I've been to have fake trees, wreaths, garland, or something like that. What gives? Anyway, back to the show. So on the desk in the office is a set of post-it notes. On these notes are messages that make me feel a little uneasy. They go like this. He is planning on letting the hostages out. 4:30. Do we have staff accountability yet? 4:35. Can Officer John escort Jane out of the room? 4:42. This is where things start to get weird. As soon as I take the picture on my phone, the entire building starts shaking violently. My first thought was earthquake. Now, I'm not speaking from experience, but I have to assume an old building isn't the type of place you want to be during an earthquake. So I start to make my way back down, only this time, rather briskly. As I get upstairs, I notice the door I propped open to keep from locking me down there was now only slightly ajar. The small piece of metal I popped it open with was nowhere to be seen, although I didn't look very hard. As I'm jogging my way out through the building, I noticed that every door I had opened upstairs was now closed tight. What the hell? Was someone fucking with me? I didn't want to stick around to find out. As I was leaving the larger room I entered through, I noticed the door I came in was shut. I pulled on it, but nothing. The fucking thing wouldn't open. Now, I'm pretty calm under pressure, but this was beginning to be too much. I was starting to freak out a bit. I made the quick decision to force my way out. Typically, I hate doing any damage to a building I'm exploring, and usually try to avoid it whenever possible, but this was a special case. I wanted the fuck out of here. Kicking the door down? I've done it before, but this door didn't seem like it was going anywhere. It opens the other way and was very sturdy. I guess I'm kicking out of the pressboard covering the window next to it. Luckily, these windows were huge and low enough where I could get a foot onto the wood. 2 kicks and the wood gives out. The building is still shaking, so I made a hasty getaway down the stairs. This is the part that still spooks me. As soon as my feet hit the ground on the last step, the building stopped shaking completely. Everything around me was silent. I must have been going crazy. I knew what I felt, and I know what I saw. I got out of there and didn't look back. A few weeks later, my crew freed up and wanted me to show them the place, even after I told them this story. Oddly enough, every other time I've been there, nothing out of the ordinary has happened. I'm not sure what happened or why, and I'm not one to believe it was a ghost or anything, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't shake me up a bit. Was it just a well-timed earthquake? Possibly, but I heard nothing about it on the news the next day, and nobody else said they felt or heard anything.
A few years ago when I was 14, my mum and I went to this abandoned hotel where my grandparents spent their honeymoon back when they got married. When we pulled over, there was an old man sitting on a white plastic chair outside of the main entrance. He looked like he was some sort of keeper, and he tells us that this place has been abandoned for some years, but was recently acquired to be remodeled and opened for business once more. He lets us go in and walk around, and I remember walking through the lobby behind the counter. They had the shelf where they kept all the keys for the rooms and mail, and there was still some keys and paper there. The usual broken window and graffiti with all the furniture and stuff left behind gave me an eerie feeling. After checking out the pool, we go back through the lobby and make our way through one of the halls that leads to the bedroom. I tried opening a door, but it was either jammed or locked, so we walked to the next one. I turned the knob, pushed it a bit, and someone slammed it shut from the inside. I remember looking back at my mum, and without saying anything we both started running to the lobby entrance. As we got closer, we started walking so as not to raise any concerns from the old keeper. So we stepped outside to the big open space where he was sitting. We walk past the keeper, and perhaps take 5 more steps when we turn our heads to say thanks before finally getting in the car. But the guy wasn't there anymore, and there was no corners nearby where he could have gone, and we were close enough that if he had ran or moved, we should have heard him. I remember Mum and I told that story to the family between laughs, but we were truly scared at the time it happened.
A couple years ago, my partner and I had freshly moved into a shared rental where I'd be closer to work. At the time, I didn't have my license, so my partner would take me every Friday to work at the local veterinarian clinic. They were 5-minute trips back and forth to work on Friday mornings and evenings. We had spotted an abandoned farmhouse located next to a local abattoir, packed to the irrigation channel at the end of the driveway, with large trees and shrubs. It was obviously abandoned for a long time for established trees to have barricaded the only entrance. One of my favorite things to do was a venture into the abandoned, so one of the following nights we decided to drag along a housemate to check it out with us. To get to this house, we had to cross the irrigation channel, which was flooded at the time, in the neighboring swampy paddock. After lots of walking through slop, hiding from passing cars and abattoir workmen, we finally managed to scale across another channel to be in the yard of the abandoned house. Before entering the house itself, we checked out the shed, full of 70s era furniture and garbage really, and an old school book belonging to a teenager from many years ago, with pictures of Brendan Fraser plastered all over the back and front. We entered the house and discovered it was abandoned, as its construction contained asbestos. Nothing happened that night, and we set off back home to have a much needed shower. Visit number 2. After a few months, we decided to take another friend to come see this creepy house, this time hoping to stay longer to really get to know the place. All the same process of entering, and this time we went straight to the front door. My partner stood on the front step, reached for the handle, then we heard hurried footsteps. It was like a humanoid stride, starting at the end closest to us, to the far side of the house. We all paused and looked at each other, sort of freaking out. My partner insisted that we continue the adventure, so we opened the door. The first thing we noticed was that the closet in the entrance was open, when it wasn't the last time. And the second thing that we noticed, although this time was closer to summer, the house got very cold. After inspecting the cupboard, I then closed it. Before we made ourselves comfortable, we checked every room to make sure no one was there, checked every cupboard and hideaway. Once we established there was no squatters or humans other than ourselves in the house, we decided to do the old dreaded circle thing, to talk to what we thought may be a ghost. We made a circle in the kitchen of the house, me, my partner, and my very hard to scare female friend, who seemed to be enjoying all of this. My partner and friend were too shy to speak out, so I started by asking, "Is anyone there?" There was no reply. I then proceeded to blabber on, saying things like, "We won't hurt you, we just want to know if you're here, and we promise we won't take anything." After a while of no response, Apart from growing amounts of cold, I gave up in my mind. But before I could say I give up, the cupboard in the front entrance, which was behind me, started to creak open. My first thought was that we touched that though. It could just be a loose door, but as I turned around, those same hurried footsteps rushed from behind me to get out of the house. No one was there, just empty footsteps. Of course my reaction was, this is fucked. Let's go home now. Fuck. And we rushed home pretty quick that time. We have since been to visit the house to show another friend, but it was clear the house had been disturbed by squatters, so there was nothing paranormal that night, just the usual marks of degenerate society in an abandoned house.
Every once in a while, I'll go urban exploring with my friends. Usually, he just checks out abandoned places and the odd factory or two. It can be a really cool experience for anyone who is into history or photography or asbestos inhalation. Today though, he decided that we were going to go to a local abandoned hospital at night with just the two of us because it would be more intense. Despite my mild hesitations, we ended up getting to the place and it started to get dark. We make our way through a window that someone else has torn the boarding off, and my friend gives his usual yell throughout the building, announcing his presence so that we don't startle anyone who might be inside, saying, "We're not the cops, we're just looking around and taking some pictures." By his logic, we're doing a courtesy to anyone else exploring the building who may panic if they hear someone else coming. By my logic, we're announcing our presence to every homeless person in the building who might want to steal a camera from two dumb kids. Despite my fears, nothing bad happens. We make our way through the building, going through multiple floors and checking out the roof last. We get a ton of cool pictures and take a look at some of the creepy ass old bathtubs and tables they left in place. There's some really cool graffiti inside as well, mixed in with your usual shitty tags. The whole building is pitch black, except for a few spots where the moonlight shines through, so we literally can only see whatever happens to be pointing at our phones at the time we use the flashlight or the camera. Even though I'm still worried about being murdered, I'm glad I went, and I'm less freaked out as we're making our way out through the window that we came in. We get back in the room, and I hop out the window first, and have my buddy pass me the camera. As I take it from him and he starts climbing out the window, a soft voice from what sounds like 10 feet inside the building says, "Wait." I look around at my friend, and we can just barely see a silhouette standing in the doorway from where we entered the room. Now, I'm not proud of what happened next, but in that moment, the force in which my butthole puckered and propelled me away from that building with enough forced momentum to last until I was at the edge of the property back towards my road. My friend followed after me quickly, more so to laugh at me than out of fear. He didn't seem to be too worried about it, although he agreed that we definitely weren't going back. What terrified me the most is that we were 100% sure that we were alone in that building. It was dead silent apart from us. And the fact that this man waited until right as we were leaving horrified me, as it made me realize that he could have been watching us and following us throughout the entire building, just listening to us talk, watching us speaking, watching us taking pictures. Best to avoid those kind of creeps.
My best friend's aunt died under some fairly mysterious circumstances when we were younger. It took several days for anyone to realize they hadn't heard from her, so her body was left in her house for several days. Fast forward to when I was 15 and he was 17. It was late one night in the summer and we were hanging out at his house. The three of us, myself, my brother, and our friend, were discussing the paranormal and similar themes. Brian told us how he was convinced that it was all real because some of the stuff he saw happened in his aunt's old house a couple years earlier. He convinces us to ride down to her old house and check it out to see if anything creepy happens. 45 minutes later, we arrive at the house. It's been nearly 10 years since anyone lived there, so everything is choked out by weeds and tall grass. Brian grabs a bag of flashlights and a video camera, and we walk up to the front porch. At this point, my brother loses his nerve and goes back to the car. Brian and I continue towards the front door, and I feel it. A heavy, freezing cold presence just in front of the door. Even though it was a summer night in North Carolina, it was still pushing 90 degrees. I had goosebumps all over my body, but we decided to go in the house anyways. We immediately turn on all the flashlights, and he fires up the video camera. He's telling me the story of how he and his dad stayed here for a few weeks after his parents got divorced, and I honestly started to lose my cool. The biggest part of the story was how he woke up in the middle of the night to see a tall silhouette standing in his doorway. Thinking it was his dad, he doesn't mind. When the silhouette turns to leave, he rolls over to go back to sleep. Instead, he decides to get up and grab a glass of water. He walks down the hall and sees the silhouette heading into his dad's room. Young Brian decided to follow it, still thinking it was his dad. Instead, he reaches the door to see a shape pressing a pillow over his dad's face, trying to smother him. He yells and turns the light on, and the shape disappears. So at this point, I'm already pretty convinced there's something there, but we press on, and Brian sits down at the kitchen table. He asks his Aunt Linda to let him know if she's still here, and we wait. Maybe 30 seconds go by, and one of the cabinet doors slowly opens. Unconvinced, Brian asks her again to tell him if she's here. The hall closet door slams open. I was finally done. I grabbed my flashlight to go, and the door of the front of the house slammed shut, and my flashlight went out. So that was the night I decided that there was definitely some truth to it.
Back in high school, a couple of my friends and I were bored one summer night and looking for something to do in my friend's neighborhood, other than the usual, which was get high. There was this abandoned house at the end of the main street, and we had heard all kinds of stories as to why it had been abandoned, from creepy to financial problems. So being a bunch of little rebels, we decided to break in through the boarded up bathroom window in the back of the house. As soon as we crawled in, there was broken glass all over the bathroom windows, being shattered from the previous vandals, and old newspaper remnants of all previous tenants' personal belongings everywhere. There were 7 of us, including myself that I can recall, and 2 girls with us if memory serves correctly. So, we all scattered around the house, rummaging around looking for anything of value. I was walking around, just sifting through things, trying to figure out why it looked like the previous owners just up and left everything. As I was walking back towards one of the rooms, I took a glance towards the kitchen and saw 2 of my friends at the dining room table. One of them was a girl. They were there with a flashlight, inspecting what was on the table. I was in the process of turning back around and heading into the room that I was just in, when I saw the other one of the girls just standing at the kitchen sink, staring perfectly still into it. I stood there for a second thinking, she must be high, and laughed a little to myself. Then proceeded to head into the room to do a little bit more exploring. When I was done exploring the room, I came back out, and my friends were still at the table just conversing about their findings, but the girl by the sink was gone, so I walked up to them and joined in on their conversation, thinking nothing of the matter. The other girl that we were with came out of the garage with the rest of my guy friends, and then it hit me. So I asked the girl why she was staring at the kitchen sink. She looked at me, confused, and said that she'd been in the garage the whole time, to which the other friends testified. At this point I was freaking out, and stated to everyone, "Well, who did I see in the kitchen a little while ago?" They all expressed that nobody had been in the kitchen or at the sink. So after I said that, we got the hell out of there, and I made sure that I wasn't the last one out. After that, none of us have been back there since.
This wasn't strictly in an abandoned building, but my old college campus had an odd building that was shaped like an authentic Scottish castle, down to towers, parapets, walls, etc. Mind you, only the outside was designed to look like a castle, with every room inside just being squeezed in wherever it could fit, so it was already famous for no two rooms being identical, as well as other architectural oddities such as staircases that led nowhere, and needing to go up and down a floor to reach a room right next to you, so it was already something of a weird, creepy building, to say the least. It was used mainly as a dorm, but a lot of it, especially the outer towers and walls, was closed off to the public, so I think those areas should count, and yes, there was a good amount of really weird stuff there. The first time I explored there, I had found a small door that was mostly rusted shut on the bottom of one of the rear towers. It was unused, but I could still open it enough to get through, so I came back that night to explore. It led to a small circular room on the inside of the tower, with a bunch of debris on the floor, like pallets, some old chairs, and a big metal plate. More on that later. However, above me, there was an open square hole that clearly led to another room inside, in what would be the top of the tower, where a ladder had probably been at one point. Once I got up there, I couldn't believe what I saw. The whole room was filled with hundreds of broken mirror shards, chained together by a string and hanging from the ceiling, as well as all over the floor and the windowsills. Also scattered on the floor were what at first looked like dozens of big coins, but on closer inspection, it turned out to be metal rims of those cheap little tea candles, stomped flat by people walking on them. Finally, in the center of the room, there was a tiny little table, on top of which was a metal bowl filled with more mirror shards, surrounded by more empty candles. I have no idea what the fuck that room had been used for, but I swear to God, it looked like some ritual shit was going down there. I took some pictures on my phone so my friends would believe me, but it was the middle of the night. All I had was a dim flashlight, and the phone cameras were shit back then, so nothing really came out of that. That was probably the single weirdest thing I saw exploring there, but the most heart-stopping thing easily came after I came back later and discovered what was under the big metal plate. Apparently, there was a whole system of tunnels, ranging from 2x4 high, that followed the castle walls all the way around, giving access to many of the other towers, to which I had just found the only entrance. Of course, I had to see what was down there. It was all a dirt floor, with lots of metal wires and bars sticking out in random places, and there I was, crawling around on my hands and knees, holding my flashlight in my teeth, trying to see where I could get to. Some parts, probably the section under parts of the walls that were used for storage, sort of opened up so that I could sort of crouch and look around the trash where students had probably hidden and forgot things over the years. But I'm a pretty small guy. I was only 5'6" and 110 pounds back then. I even had to struggle to squirm through some of the passages, which were sometimes partially filled by plumbing, leading me to wonder what the hell these passages were made for, if it's too tight for anyone but a scrawny teenager. Anyway, it was in one of these super tight passages, 5 feet underground, that I had one of the most terrifying experiences in my life. Turning around a corner, I saw exactly what you don't want to see in a place like that. Sneakers, connected to a pair of jeans. As I adjusted my flashlight, which again was in my teeth, it got worse. A red flannel shirt, not empty and lying flat mind you, but very much filled and body-shaped, lying in the tunnel facing away, just a few feet in front of me. I don't get scared a lot, but I could feel the color drain from my face, just looking at what appeared to be a goddamn murder victim, stashed away in some dark tunnel under a dorm to be forgotten. I don't know how I mustered the courage to keep going, but I kept getting closer. It was also clear that it didn't have a head either. I finally got a good enough angle sneaking by it to see where the head had been, only to see a speaker membrane under the shirt collar. The whole thing was a fucking mannequin, dressed up like a human, with wireframe arms and legs, probably as some old Halloween prop, hence the speaker. God only knows why someone decided that this of all places was the best part to hide it.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to give a huge thank you to Skinned Locust for his help in this collaboration. He is a fantastic narrator, as I'm sure you guys heard, so be sure to pop over to his channel and check him out to show him some love. I've been receiving your stories by the handful, so thank you all for your submissions. You should be getting a video with your submissions very soon. And remember that if you want to share your story, all that you need to do is go to my Reddit page and submit it as a text post, or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. If you enjoyed today's video, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to not miss your daily dose of horror. And if you would like to do something truly amazing today to help support the channel, you can chip in via Patreon. You can find the link in the description, as well as the links to my social media. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.